How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So before we delve into the album, I'd like to start kind of before that, because you've been making music quite a while. You've been quite successful in making music. How important was this full body of work for you to kind of arrive at this point?
I think that before I was just making like collections of songs that I had written over years, and this feels way more intentional, and I'm actually like, I went into this process wanting to write a story and to fit all the pieces together.
Now, I believe you started writing this kind of thematic short story a couple of years ago. So what was the spark that kind of gave rise to that story?
I don't remember. I read a lot of stories. Probably it's just like an amalgamation of all of my favorite things, my favorite video games, my favorite anime and fantasy books, all put together in one.
So it's kind of a pop culture in general your inspiration, not necessarily just music?
I think definitely, like, I'm heavily inspired by like old anime films and video games, and I mean the main thing is fantasy literature and fantasy illustration.
Is this something you picked up as a young girl? Is it something that you kind of tuned into later?
I've been like really obsessed with all things like folklore and mythology and fairy. The fae in general,
Sure.
I've been obsessed with since I was a child, like making fairy houses and writing spells and just, consuming as much fairy literature as possible. And so it feels nostalgic to be now writing a story that includes the fae.
Look, I can also imagine it's kind of a different world that you delve into, or that you kind of escape into. So if we think back at the time when you got into all this fantasy, what was the mindset? Well, and it's difficult to explain perhaps now, but was it sort of an escape to kind of enter into your own world?
I think that reading is definitely like a little vacation for your head from reality. But I was also spending a lot of time in nature growing up. So I grew up in like rural North Carolina.
Sure.
And I think reading fantasy literature, it kind of infuses animacy into like the forests and the animals around you. And I think it kind of breathes magic into sort of ordinary aspects of nature. And for me, it made like playing outside really magical to read fairy stories.
And am I right in saying that you've in more recent years have kind of reconnected to that feeling, because you moved to, I believe, Latvia, and well, let me ask that first. And what kind of music did you consume when you moved away? Was your kind of musical or popular culture diet different when you moved?
I didn't really grow up in a super musical household. I think my first experience with music was my own, like beyond like country music and like church music. I think my first experience with music that really like set me alight was stuff that I found myself. I had an aunt show me MIA when I was 11, when I got my first iPod Nano, and it was a pink iPod Nano, and my aunt put Bucky Dungun by MIA onto my iPod Nano, and that really changed the game for me. But I was listening to a lot of artists in that world. I am still like heavily inspired by that era of music, like MIA and Gwen Stefani and Bjork and Nicki Minaj and like Missy Elliott, of that era. Just like
Sure.
There was something super magical about it, I think. Not to say those artists still aren't making incredible music. But for me, that was when I first discovered them. So
right,
yeah.
and when you delved into these musicians, and did you kind of know that you wanted to be a creator of music as well?
Yeah, I did always. I don't know. I think it really clicked for me when I was like 15 or 16 that I really liked to write, and also listen to these very powerful, unapologetic artists. And I think for me, I fused my two loves together and was writing songs. Not very good songs, but I was writing them nonetheless. And I was really like dead set on becoming a full-time musician.
Do you remember, even though you say they weren't that good, do you remember any of them?
Yeah, and it makes my skin crawl to think about them. But yeah, it was a start for sure.
Yeah, what I always find interesting about those kind of early attempts at music, could you hear kind of what you were trying to do but just didn't have the skills yet? Or is it completely different?
I think I knew what I was... That's actually a really good question. I think there was like a little kernel of something in it. I look back on that version of me with fondness and with love. I was always very lyrically creative. So yeah, there was that.
Can you give me, I don't know if it's too much, but can you give me like a slight example of what you would write about?
No, I will take that to the grave.
Fair enough, fair enough. But so then there was a point where you decided to actively pursue music, and then I believe it's around 17, 18, you decide, okay, I need to go somewhere and then kind of chase this dream I have. Was that a difficult decision to make?
Yeah, definitely, because I mean, it's so rare that people are able to turn their love of music into a profitable career that can sustain them. So I feel incredibly grateful and lucky. And yeah, I still am like shocked that I'm doing it full time sometimes. And obviously for like a parent, it's scary to have a child going off to pursue that. But I will give my parents credit. They were very supportive.
Okay.
They just wanted me to adventure and explore. And yeah, I definitely worked a lot of odd jobs to support that dream. But it was worth it. And
I imagine those initial kind of struggles or just honing your craft and kind of grinding, that it's very important to where you are now. Is there a memory that sticks out from those initial years trying to get your music off the ground?
So I moved to London when I was 18, and that was like 9 years ago now. Wow. Wow. Time really flies.
We're getting old.
Damn. That's almost a decade. Fuck. Yeah, I was a baby, like such a baby, but I was so headstrong and like, this is gonna happen for me. I'm gonna make this happen for me. I definitely had a level of confidence that I do not possess now at the age of 18.
How come?
I don't know. I think when you're 18, you're like, you have less like, you know less.
That makes sense.
You're stupider, so the world hasn't beaten you down quite as much. So maybe you will say things or do things or put yourself in positions that could possibly embarrass you or put you at risk, or just because you don't know. And I did that a lot for myself. And I got really lucky because a lot of those risks that I took paid off for me. I mean, I definitely was like kind of an idiot, kind of stupid and like not in the best position sometimes, not in the safest environments. But it paid off. But now, knowing what I know now, I would never put myself in that position again.
Sure. Is there one risk then that you can share that you kind of that paid off, that you went for something? Maybe it was crazy to think about now, but something you went for and that it paid off.
I mean, yeah, just like sleeping on random people's couches.
Yeah, sure.
Which definitely, like, if I had a child, I'd be like, what the fuck? Do not do that. Do not sleep on a random man's couch. But when I was 18, I was like, yeah, the world is fine. The world is kind and loving. Everyone wants to help me.
And then reality sets in a little bit.
Yeah.
Was there a turning point then for you where kind of things clicked and you kind of figured out figured out a better way to navigate what you were doing?
Yes, definitely. I think there was like with my album, sorry, not my album, with my first little project, Hi It's Me. I had projects before that, but it felt very aimless and like I was emulating other people, and it was messy, and I don't like listening to those songs. And I think making Hi It's Me felt like I was caught in a riptide, and then had finally like caught onto a rock and was like, here it is, like this is it. So yeah, not to say that that's like my favorite music I've made, like the most evolved version of me, but it was like a life raft for sure, and I felt like I was pulling myself up to be the artist that I wanted to be.
Yeah, because I can imagine you kind of feel your way initially, feel your way out initially, but then you start to hone into the things that you like, and the aesthetics start to take shape, and kind of what you are as an artist. So how do you see that development from let's say the last 2 years and to this album? Because has that been a big development as well?
Yeah, so the crazy thing about putting out an album is it takes so long.
Right.
And then you get to the point where it's out and you're like, oh, I've evolved past these songs now. Sure. There are a few songs on this album that I feel like are the truest form of what I want to do as an artist. And those songs I'm really proud of. But there are a few songs on the album that I'm like, oh, I'm over them now. But I feel really proud of this record.
What was the time space then that the album was written in? Was it kind of like a 6-month period or a longer stretch?
I'd say like 2 years. Okay. 2 years, but not consecutively. There was a chunk of like 4 or 5 months where I wrote a lot of it. I was just in the studio every single day. And that was, a big chunk of the album. But then there were songs that were a little older or came in at the last minute. Like I said, putting out an album takes so long.
When did you figure out that the Fae realm of the Fae world would be an inspiration and would kind of create that overarching conceptual framework? When did I know that? Well, I wrote a short story like 2.5 years ago. I don't know. I've been saying 2 years for a while, so maybe it's longer than that. I wrote a short story that then informed the song Weedkiller, and then the song Weedkiller informed the rest of the album. And not every song on the album fits into the theme. A lot of the story is told in the visual side of it, through the music videos, through like the symbols and sigils we've created. We created 4 album covers that all tell different stories. So there's a lot of visual storytelling that we're doing, as well as I wrote a comic with DC that's kind of like a little. It's just like a little tiny little story from the world. And I'm also writing a graphic novel to branch, like I'm writing a graphic novel to fully like fill out the different parts of the story that I want to tell that weren't told in the album. So the album is a piece of it, but not the whole story. Yeah, from doing my research and kind of delving into what you do, it really feels like it's like more of a multimedia approach. It's not just music. It's the aesthetics. It's the visuals. It's the you're writing a graphic novel or a comic book now. So has it always been this kind of immersive project in a way?
No, because I didn't have the budget.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Because it's expensive, really, really expensive. But
What makes it worth it then now?
I'm really enjoying making these music videos. The cheerleader music video was one of my favorite music videos I've ever done. Weedkiller as well was like just so beautiful. I had such a good time on set with my best friends, and it was beautiful. And I think to be able to work with other artists who want to help me tell this story is like one of the most gratifying experiences of my career. And to work with other like really passionate people who will sit and like scrapbook with me and like work on this story with me and like help me tell it through different mediums, like you said, is really, it's fun.
Sure.
It's like having a good time, which is pretty sick. And yeah, and I love being able to tell stories through different mediums.
And then this, obviously then at some point you're releasing it to the world and you open it for judgment. So is that always an anxious period, or where are you now mentally?
Anxious.
Okay.
Definitely. I'm really scared to put out this album. I think just because I've been sitting on it for so long, I have no objectivity with this album. I just like, after a while you have no idea what the songs even sound like because you've heard them like a million times. And I've remixed and mastered this album like twice. So I've been driving my managers insane. I'll like hear a master and I'll be like, I don't like that sound. And he's like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. But we do it. But yeah, it's definitely nerve-wracking because then you also get like music critics in, and it's just like, and some of those music critics are just like cosplaying being music critics. They're like just being a dickhead for the sake. They're like, I'm a critic. I simply have to write something scathing. Just like people being cruel online. Just like it becomes something that isn't mine anymore. I think it goes through a period of not being mine anymore. I think once it comes out and it dies down a little bit and you get to sit into like touring this album and you really get to sit with the songs and like put new meaning into them, I think it becomes yours again. But the initial putting on an album is really nerve-wracking.
But I can also imagine today you were here for kind of a fan event, and I kind of walked past the window. I saw those faces really paying attention to what you were telling them, and kind of sharing it in that way with the fans who actually love it, and not the critics, I should say. But that must be special. Super special.
I like just telling my team before that I really love those. I love these events, like doing the pop-up events, doing the Q&As. I do like a VIP experience before my shows where we do a Q&A, and like I'm gonna play like an old song and they're gonna vote on it, and just like being able to actually like talk to the people who listen to my music. And we have a Discord that's really beautiful. I try not to engage on social media like outside of Discord, because to be on Discord, you have to actually like my music. So, I mean, obviously there are trolls on there as well, but to like be active on Discord, you have to actually take an interest in my music, and you can't just be like a passive asshole.
Is that a difficult, because obviously I'm not in the public eye, and then I ask this every once in a while to artists, but is it difficult to navigate kind of what people think of you, what people say online, because there's so much nonsense online?
Yeah, there's a lot of nonsense.
Or have you kind of grown used to, okay, people will have their opinion that has nothing to do with me, so...
Yeah, I've kind of come to a new place now that when people are cruel to me online, it doesn't exist in my realm. It's not...
Right.
It's not what the people who love me think about me, or like what my fans think about me. It doesn't exist in my world. It is always, when someone's being cruel online, it's always just them projecting something that's going on with them onto you. You're a vessel for some deep hurt that they have, because no one does that unless they're hurt, or they're not getting enough love at home. Their self-esteem is really low. They're like being bullied. Like there's obviously something going on, and that's in their world,
right,
and that's their realm. So I don't even look at it. It's not even worth it. It has nothing to do with me. It has a lot to do with them. And there's so much casual cruelty on the internet, especially towards women and femmes in the public eye. And I go online and I just see this like witch hunting and this like mob mentality of watching women and femmes being dragged to the ground and humiliated and people like laughing like hyenas and just like stamping on them and just laughing and loving it. Like really, we have not evolved from like witch hunting
Right.
and like watching people be torn apart by lions. Like we love that shit, and we've just taken the arena is now on social media, and I'm just like it's evil, it's pure evil, and I refuse to let that affect me because it's just like a sickness of humanity.
Well, I agree completely because our hardware, the way I see it is our hardware is still the same, and yet we have this technology which makes us believe we're smarter than we actually are, but we're still the base.
We're not.
Tribal.
We're like, and then added in with like extreme misogyny, and it's become this, just like, it's a fucking horror movie, honestly. I think it's really dark. I try not to go online. I really try not to go online and watch it happen, but it's hard sometimes. Yeah, so being able to like have a community and have someone to rely on has been kind of like taken away from Western society, I think, and we're way more isolated and lonely now than we've ever been, and that just breeds really bad depression and mental health problems, and I feel like you can definitely see that online. But also I feel like there are hopeful sparks out there. I feel like people are slowly enacting change in their communities, but that's also coupled with a mental health epidemic that we're having, so I don't know.
We kind of have to wait to see where it ends up.
Yeah, I feel like psychologists will be having an absolute field day studying our generation.
But obviously there's good things, and especially when it comes to mental health, and I noticed this in myself as well, music helps a lot. So is that kind of your escape, music, and kind of that creative aspect of your personality?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about it the other day, like the most beautiful thing about music is you can hear a song that isn't even in your language and like you can have an emotive response to this music, and you can kind of understand what it's about just from the music alone. And that is such a beautiful thing. I think that so many people, especially at a live show, I love playing live shows. That's my favorite part about being a musician is doing the live performances. And being on stage and like having that energy exchange with people, and everyone's like singing the same song, and it's so beautiful. I feel like it's like this ancient ritual that we've been doing for like since humanity began, pretty much. Every time I go to a show, especially like in an arena or something, and I hear all those people singing the same song together, I'm like, whoa, I'm like really struck by it. It always like gives me goosebumps and makes me cry. No matter what artist it is, I'm like, how are we all doing this? Like, how are we all, like, it's such a universal part of being a human being. I think it's beautiful.
So with that in mind then, what do you hope that people hear when they put on Weedkiller?
I was really struggling coming up with an answer to this question because it's a common question I get asked, like, what do you hope people take from this record? And I'm kind of just like, I don't know. I hope they like it. But I think what I've come to is that for me and for everyone, and the reason why we have music is to help ourselves like tell our stories. So like you listen to your favorite music to tell stories about your own life back to yourself. Like when you're, for example, like when you're listening to a sad song and you're thinking about something sad in your life and it makes you cry because you're like telling that story back to yourself in order for you to process it, which I think is really cool. And even like happy songs, like songs that help boost your confidence or like help you feel energized, you're telling yourself a story, and it's you're using this person's music to tell yourself stories about yourself. And I think that the best music is super emotive in that way, and I want this album to do that.
Well, I wish you best of luck with
you.
the release and everything else.
Thank you.
May
Those
I
are
thank
really
you
interesting questions.
It's very kind of you to say. May I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right.